topic here in Russia. We have a very distinguished panel here. Unfortunately, Andrei Sharonov, the Deputy Mayor for Economic Policy in Moscow, is delayed. I hope he'll join us during the course of the session. But we'll crack straight on. To open our discussion, I'm going to ask Pekka Viljakainen to speak first. Pekka, who's better known, I think, in Russian financial circles as the bulldozer, a name he was given by President Medvedev himself, is an advisor to the Russian government on investing and in growth companies, and is an advisor to the Sholkovo Foundation, and has recently completed a trip around all Russia's regions where he's visited a very large number of small and medium-sized companies to try and understand the problems of financing. And so I ask him to speak first.
So, Dobre utro. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, I'm here kind of in two roles. AI Capital, where I'm a chairman, it's my small investment company, let's say a private office. But today, actually, in this particular session, I'm sharing some views about what we have learned about Russia, Russian investment climate. And my focus is mainly and only startups, small and medium-sized companies. Of course, raising capital for infrastructure projects, for airports and streets, roads, and all that kind of stuff is also extremely important part. Let's say a traditional part where it's very capital intensive, but my focus is about new businesses and high tech. Yeah, I'm an advisor for Mr. Vekselberg at Skolkovo, and I wanted to push as a bulldozer, or like in Russia, Finsky Konь, I wanted to push a survey analyzing what is happening not only in St. Petersburg, not only in Moscow, not only in Skolkovo, but across Russian regions. And we took a great team joining Russian venture company, Rosmaladyozh, FASI, all key ministries, and we organized the 16 cities tour. And first thing what I want to tell, of course Russians know it, but all the foreign guests here, Russia is a really big country. 24,000 kilometers in a plane in 16 cities, and about 10,000 people, or 7,000 people joining on those sessions. This is a really big country. However, from the investment standpoint, I was told that even Russians were asking from me, why do you go for Vladivostok? Why do you go for Novosibirsk? Why do you go for Rostov? Why do you go on the different cities? Because the big opportunities are actually in Moscow and St. Petersburg. After the tour, even the Russian colleagues who were joining with me, they changed their view. So I was really positively surprised with the fact that not only these 16 cities, but most of the regions in the past 5 years, they have not only started, but they have already achieved big changes in their way of working, how to develop new businesses. And the motivation is pretty clear. Russia needs tens of thousands new companies in coming 10, 20 years to compensate, which inevitably will be in the future not to be so dependent anymore with the oil and gas production. So the drivers are clear, and that's something. When we talk about the capabilities, and now I put the investor hat on, I think what Russia needs is not only the money, I would call it, or Americans call it smart money, because the investment, Russia has a lot of money and a lot of capital, but what these startups, what these SMEs, what these new companies need, they need more advices. They need board members, they need active executives, and there is a lot of, let's call it a lot of kind of companies, the bandwidth of companies is really high. So if anybody in the room is planning to invest on Russia, Russians or foreigners, I would not do investments on portfolio investment based. But if you have a team, if you have a Russian team, if you have people who know Russia to support these entrepreneurs, I think that the investments are extremely fruitful here. And also the valuation levels, which is a key thing for successful thing in the regions, are, at least for me, much, much more tempting than in the overheated parts. The other thing, and the last point in this intro, what I want to make is that the biggest barrier for investments in Russia for these companies is not corruption, it is not bureaucracy, it is not the lack of companies. Yes, all of these exist in certain extent, but these are not never preventing me as an investor to invest to Russia. But what is the problem is the lack of trust. And I'm not talking about politics now. I'm not talking about governmental issues. It is when you talk for a young entrepreneur in any city and he or she needs $1 million, by definition, he or she is afraid of me as an investor. He thinks, what is my motivation? What is my plan? Am I here to take your business? Why do I need money? So it's not only that like you invest in Silicon Valley or in Finland, the guys are like taking you in a big hug and they want your money and you have to sell yourself. And this is the lack of trust. And I would like to hear in this panel also highlight the importance of this part, that Russia is about personal relations. A trust between friends, not so much of vodka drinking anymore, but it's more about the trust. And without that trust, no investment should be made here. And last but not least, as a point, every single investor knows that in Russian trade law and the federal law, there is one weakness, and it's the minority guarantees for minority shareholders. I always remember when I did the first investment in Russia, and I asked from my lawyer team, what does it mean if I own less than 50% of the shares? And the lawyer said, do you want to have a short or long version? And the short version was, Pekka, you will be screwed. I don't know how you translate it in Russian. But the point is, this is partially a historical thing, because most of the companies which I have invested, they operate in Russia, the teams are here, but they are incorporated in Luxembourg, they are incorporated in Cyprus, they are incorporated in Helsinki, and then you can do the deals based on the European trade law. So even that has been overcome. So all in all, to summarize, if I want to triple my money, and I want to triple my money in coming 5 to 10 years, this is the minimum requirements, I see Russia is SME market and the high-tech area extremely, extremely attractive.
Thank you very much, Pekka, for that introduction to the issue. Before we turn to the providers of finance, I thought we'd go next to Sir Suma Chakrabarti, who is the president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The EBRD has recently done its own study into finance, the supply of finance in Russia, and which has raised some interesting issues. So I'll ask him to speak next.
Well, thanks, Simon, and thanks to Pekka as well for what he said, which I agree with much of what he said. I think, from our point of view, what our studies show is not going to surprise anyone here. The biggest killer for Russian entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurs, is the concentration of economic power in 3 areas, really. One is at the sectoral level. We know this. We all know that oil and gas still dominates the economy. Everyone knows that. 70% of exports, the government budget completely dependent on it as well, which leads to all sorts of problems in terms of volatility at macroeconomic level. So it's a good case anyway for diversification there. Secondly, the concentration of economic power geographically, which Pekka has talked about. We have the same experience, that too much economic power is in a certain part of Russia. It's not very well spread. And thirdly, the state still controls too many industries, and this is also well known, and the need for the state to let go, if you like, is a part of the thing. So concentration of power in those 3 spheres, I think, is a big issue. It seems to me that there are a number of things one has to do, and they're not new, but they need repeating and repeating, because it's obviously when you have concentration of power on those three spheres, you have vested interests in any country which depend on that concentration on power. So the first is really to try and tackle some of the investment climate issues. Now, Russia has been doing quite a lot of work on that. I think FIAC, for example, has been working quite closely with the Russian administration on some of those issues, but the red tape, bureaucratic hurdles are still seen as a real problem. This is quite an interesting thing. In our sort of marketing of Russian to foreign investors, if I market Russia to those who are already operating in Russia, many of you are here who already have investments in Russia, it's actually quite an easy sell because you know how to navigate the system. But if I market Russia to new foreign investors, they don't know how to market the system and they're incredibly frightened about it. So it's very difficult for EBRD to actually at the moment persuade new foreign investors to come to Russia. Quite easy for us to do repeat business with existing investors. But Russia needs new foreign investors as well, not the same old people. It needs them as well, but it needs to. And I think the reason I say the importance of this is the more Russia is interlinked with the global economy, with new foreign investors, the more some of the skills, entrepreneurial skills, will be transferred automatically as companies establish themselves here. So one of the things I notice quite often in Russia, it has great education levels compared with many other countries, but the management skills in many companies are below what you might see in other BRICS, for example. And I think that's partly because Russia is not as integrated into the global economy yet as it should be, and with more integration, with more new companies coming in to Russia, more management skills will get transferred, more entrepreneurial skills will get transferred. Two last points from me, I think. I strongly agree with Pekka about the importance of innovation and the IT area. But I think there's quite an interesting debate here. When I talk to Israeli entrepreneurs, British entrepreneurs who want to come to Russia because of the education levels in the ICT area, knowledge economy area, what most puts them off is a top-down approach to this sort of area. They don't think ICT, generally the knowledge economy, is nurtured by top-down approaches. They think it's much better to have a much more of a bottom-up approach, generally, and that's again, something about the state and willingness to let go. The other area I very much agree with Pekka, SMEs. I think this is an under-resourced area. We ought to be doing a lot more, EBRD ought to be doing a lot more on SMEs throughout Russia and outside of the advanced regions in the much more underdeveloped regions of Russia. And we are, in our new strategy, which we just started implementing, moving much more eastwards and southwards on purpose. Much harder, but much more worthwhile longer term in building those small and medium-scale enterprises who will have the entrepreneurs that will grow. I'll leave it there, Sam.
Thank you very much indeed. So we could turn now to a supplier of growth capital. I'm going to ask Sergei Borisov, who's the Vice President for Small Business Development at Sberbank, but also an ex-president of the Russian Federation of Small Businesses, to talk about some of the things that Sberbank are doing to help support Russian growth.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'm really well informed in topic of SMA. I've been heading the OPOR of Russia for 10 last years, the big association of small and medium business in Russia, and I'm just working in the advisory board here. And the president of this association is sitting in this hall, and I also have my own opinion what the small and medium business needs in order to develop, in order to go forward, in order to open new niches. Because for big enterprises, everything is quite clear, and the access to the capital is very clear. There is a subject of lean. There are business plans, and many business plans are aimed not only at natural resources, but also at the development of production. There are not many manufacturers here, but as for the small and medium enterprises, we have a lot of problems here. I would like not to be emotional here, We only ask 6,000 entrepreneurs every year in order to find out what problems are the most important for you, and the results are as follows. And I will also give a comment on what Pekka said about the trust. I will agree with the lack of trust. I will put the lack of trust, I will rank it very high in this ranking, but the entrepreneurs said they had a lack of knowledge and skills. If you don't have enough skills and knowledge, it means that the business plans are not fulfilled, the loans taken are not paid. Second, the taxes are ranked secondly. And we also have quite a big problem with the social payments in this case. We're really far behind due to this experiment. And on place third is the access to capital and the lack of loans. In last year it was about 30%. So 30% of the entrepreneurs were saying that they were suffering from the lack of loans. Now the situation got a little bit better, and the situation now shows that 22% of entrepreneurs saying that it is quite difficult to get a loan, and the competition in small and medium business is growing, and we having new products. The bank has quite a wide line of products, more than 20 products for small and medium businesses. We can also supply the demands of small and medium business. We need to understand the demands of the small companies, and we are also harmonized with the European legislation. So the small company has normally about 100 employees, and 40% is not retail or trade business, and the sole proprietors. We have 3.5 million sole proprietors in Russia. They're normally active in trade, in retail, 80%, 10% in transport, 8% in transport and logistics, 1.5% in healthcare and social care. And as for the innovative small business, probably has 1 to 2%, was too small and not enough for Russia. As for GDP, the small business contributes to 23% to the GDP and 25% in terms of jobs. And President Putin identified in his decrees and articles that we need to reach 50% of jobs in small business. It's quite difficult to achieve, especially to make the small businesses attractive for banks. It's quite difficult to change the regulation, because the loans that we introduced in Sberbank, so without any lien, is a kind of loan of trust. It's very popular, but in this case the risk is quite high. That's why the interest rate is 19.5%, which is actually unbelievable high. There are also banks offering 20 or 25% as an interest rate. We also think how to decrease this interest rate, and also there is a governmental commission headed by Igor Shuvalov thinking how to make it possible. We can also talk about it today. We also have quite a big problem with the startups or with the starting up entrepreneurs. We also started an experiment at Sberbank. We have a business start product at Sberbank. It's a product which can be implemented through the franchising companies. And the possibility of no success for small entrepreneurs is even lower if you use the experience of the people who already implemented such a chain. So we also connected some industrial associations, for example, in the area of cosmetics or restaurant owners. Igor Buhau, the head of the Restaurant Owner Association in Russia, they're also working on it currently. The money is here. The money is available. And it was a good company and a franchise approved the business plan, the project, and the people went through the training, but 60% are not able to open up a business because the infrastructure, there is a lack of infrastructure, there is a lack of energy, and there is also a problem with the grid connection. You have money and ideas, but you don't have any opportunity to open up your business. I'd like to stop what I'm saying, and I can also continue later on.
Thank you very much indeed, Sergei, for that. I'm now going to turn to Mark Haefele from UBS. He's the Global Head of Investment and the Chief Investment Officer of the Wealth Management Division. And as a result, and in that capacity, he's a provider of finance on a global basis, and including investments in Russia. So I'll hand over to him. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess just for opening remarks, I'd like to tell you a little bit about where UBS works in the capital structure in Russia, not as an advertisement, but hopefully because there's some questions, and to give you a view into the different markets that we do try to serve. And then I'll tell you a little bit about my view as an asset allocator, and we have about 1.6 trillion under advisement and 130 billion in discretionary capital that we deploy in an asset allocation. Kind of my view on SME lending globally to put this discussion into some context. So with UBS, we touch a lot of different levels in the capital structure and in different markets. We've been in Russia since 1997 as the #1 global wealth manager. We have a dedicated capital advisory team that deals with mid-markets in UBS. We bank 1 out of 2 billionaires. So when you talk about smart money, we have this pool of people that loves to get involved and be advisors on deals. We, of course, as an international global investment bank, we bring billions of dollars every year to Russia into the banks, which then in a follow-on way, provide lending to the SME region. So we see things from different perspectives in the markets and the capital structure, although it does, for me, it comes from an international perspective. And what I'd say there is that Russia has done a lot to, including this forum, this entire forum, this panel, lending efforts, to bring attention to this issue and to raise it, because SME lending is difficult globally. Let me give you some examples. The UK, according to the World Bank, is ranked #1 in terms of countries where it's easy to provide credit into the SME space. Yet the government is desperate to get loan growth up in the commercial space. They've launched a funding for lending scheme. It's attracted less than 20 of 80 billion pounds that's available. When you look at the Eurozone, take a little wider view, the difference in lending rates for small companies within a few hundred miles of each other, Germany to Spain, there's 2 percentage point difference. And this is at a time when the rates in these countries are at historic lows. So this is a problem that extends beyond, well beyond Russia. And I guess it's important to think about it in that context, that everybody is looking to address these factors. So maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Mark. Finally, I'm delighted that Andrei Sharonov has arrived, the Deputy Mayor for Economic Policy in Moscow, who will give a slightly different perspective on this issue, no doubt.
Thank you, Simon. If you don't mind, I will speak Russian. Sorry for being late. Yeah.
Now, first and foremost, I'd like to start from a thought that I hope is evident for everyone who's gathered around the room, that the access to the capital is a task that has to be solved by the market instruments or institutions and not by the government or the regional government in particular. Very often, in accordance with an old and established Russian tradition, we try to resolve a task by concerted effort and involving everybody involved, but very often it doesn't prove to be successful. I mean, the government is influencing the access towards the capital and significantly influences, but the capital must arrive from the respective market institutions, and the government must never replace those institutions. The government, in a more broader sense of that word, must be responsible for the macroeconomic stability and for the environment, the conditions for investment that predefine the accessibility of capital, the availability of the money, and the cost of money, for which very often governments are being criticized by the banks. However, I would agree to the position of the bank and their assessment of the macroeconomic situation and the risks which bring up the cost of money and why it is so difficult for the money to get into small and medium enterprises. Second topic that our institutions are responsible for is the environment, and this is also a critical role that the government has to play. And the third area where regional government may come into play is facilitation, is the support of small and medium enterprises in getting access to the capital. I'd like to support Sergei, and I'd like to say that very often the entrepreneurs themselves and the government that follows suit very often say that all the problems boil down to the lack of capital. However, I believe the issues of tutorship and mentorship are of crucial importance here. Because if skills and knowledge come later than money, then the money runs out much faster than the success sets in, and very often it may be prone or it may be due to a non-competent experience or non-competent actions. So very often we see that entrepreneurs mostly need the knowledge and mostly need the mentorship, especially when talking to others who have already gone this way several times over and who might be aware of those obvious mistakes that entrepreneurs might not know exist. And in the end, I would like to name you just a few specific instruments and tools which the government of Moscow uses in order to increase and enhance the access to the capital, and by means of which they're stimulating small and medium enterprises actions and activities and work in the city. And I will not reiterate that SME is a crucial element of the economy of the country because it serves as the creator of jobs. It's also a taxpayer, a great taxpayer, and this is also very important for us because we're still going in this direction. SME can be viewed as a style of life for the majority of the citizens of any given country. Now, I would like to name just a few of the tools and instruments we use. First, subsidies. Bearing in mind that loans is an instrument that can be delivered by special banking institutes, and the government can play a role in here, we must not take a role on ourselves of identifying the efficiency of specific projects or their profitabilities when there are special people already available in the market, where there are special market instruments like investment banks and so on. And we should be just a complement. We should just use their expertise and share risks with them to do so. If they're mistaken, they lose their money, and it's better if they lose them first. We must lose our money only in the last, or only as a second party, so to say, and this rule must always be present. So I believe that everywhere where governmental money is spent, it must be wed or married with private money in order to avoid any large failures. And I would like to call you just two Moscow institutes or two Moscow instruments. One has already have a proven track record. It's the Moscow Investment Fund. It takes about it takes a certain share of risks in case of the loanee default. The sums can be really high. Several thousands of companies have received banking loans throughout the recent years, and they might have not gotten those loans unless this fund vouchsafed for them. And our task is to increase the leverage, is to increase the scope, and to give an opportunity for more entrepreneurs and for more financial institutes to use the mechanisms of this guarantee fund. Another mechanism that was created just last year ago is a microfinancing support fund. Again, it is based on the risk share initiative. We do not work with final and end beneficiaries. We work with the financial institutes who choose their own beneficiaries. They have their own technologies, scoring technologies. They have specially trained people that we never have ourselves, and we must not have them ourselves. Usually we talk about the sums of loans up to 1 million rubles for startup companies, for young entrepreneurs without any collaterals, and these instrument is good for the seeding stage, the early stage of entrepreneurship activities. Now, I'd also like to say that the state must not just give access to money, but it has to contribute to activities that would help to reduce losses, like when dealing with the red tape or corruption. So I would like to attribute any government's efforts in bringing down administrative barriers to an activity, to measures that reduce the need of financing, right? Because by that you also bring down the costs and the losses of any given company. Now, the last thing I would like to say is, bearing in mind that in Moscow we have several thousand small and medium companies, individual entrepreneurs, we are not capable of covering all of them. That's why we try to refer to those institutes who cover the majority of small and medium enterprises or companies. And also, we try to find out which segments is the most interesting for us. And for us, we found out that innovative activities, that innovative entrepreneurship, venture companies look like the way to go. And it's not just our preference. We appreciate that Moscow is a scientific metropolis. More than 40% of all scientific workers of the country and the same number of scientific institutions of a similar quality, let's say it in this way, are located in Moscow. And more than 1 million students stay in Moscow. And our task is to create the most attractive opportunities for these people, for them to stay in Moscow and not to become the citizens of the world, so that they would leave and end up at some our competitors. So that's what we can also do. Our objective is to continue to support innovations, and we can do that by means of establishing specific business incubators, special taxation zones, and whatnot. We are not reinventing the wheel in here, but we are trying to be focused on that.
Very much indeed. Now, I know that before we move to questions, that Pekka wants to come back on something that Andrei just said, so I'll pass it straight back to Pekka.
No, not directly what Andrei said. I just want to share one view, what I have learned here in Russia, not in Russia only, but the same in Finland, where I'm originally coming from. This granting, giving support for the companies, there is also a tendency that many entrepreneurs become lazy if this granting is not kind of always supported by the private funding, co-funding. And I must say that on behalf of Skolkovo, we have changed the policy very strictly, that we don't fund anymore with the granting companies which are not able to attract private funding from the very early stage, because it also underlines what was stated here about the management skills, leadership skills, and so forth. But actually the other point, what I was saying about the banks, is that when I was in this tour, I think it was the city of Astrakhan, where at the end of the day, there was about 400 startup companies, and I took the chair, and I was sitting in the front, and I asked, okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how I can help you? And one guy raised the hand and said that, can you tell Mr. Gref at Sberbank that my company is good? And I said, okay, spasibo bolshoy, what's the next wish? and the reason why I'm telling this, is that I am coming from Finland, which is with the helicopter only 20 minutes from here. It's a small Mickey Mouse country. There are a lot of startups, and it's really booming there. I have invested personally to 20 startups there, and none of them has got a single euro from the banks, ever. The Finnish banking system is in a good shape. There are not so much bad loans, and there are AAAs, but the negative side of it, that you cannot get any money from the bank if you are a startup, if you're an SME, because you have to have not only 80% of the guarantees, but nowadays you have to have 125% of the guarantees. And whose startup company can have 125% of the assets to cover if everything goes wrong? So what I'm telling by this is that, yes, I am aware of the governmental things and government-owned banks support programs. I highly appreciate that, but I'm only saying that for me, the only way to really boost the topic, what we are saying here, is to get the business angels, venture companies, funds who only give the smart element, not only the money there, and make that fly faster in this region. I don't honestly believe, I believe on banks, all my money is in the banks, but I don't believe that they will solve the problem here in a way like it will be like a turnkey solution.
Thank you, Pekka. Well, for me, by far, one of the most interesting things to come out of this discussion, the most shocking thing to come out of the discussion, was Sergei saying that the cost of loans for businesses is 19.5%. I mean, Mark talked about the debates and the issues within the Eurozone and in the UK over SME financing, but you know, the debate in Italy, where 90% of the economy and employment is in the SME sector, you know, we're talking there about 6% on SME loans, or 7% versus 3 or 4 in Germany. For Russian SMEs to compete in an economy with 19.5% for their bank loans, and goodness knows what returns that the venture capitalists and the angel financiers would be requiring if the banks themselves are requiring 90.5%, seems to be a very serious structural issue for the economy. I know Sergei wanted to come back on some things Pekka said, so maybe you could discuss, but also address why the cost of funding is so high. Is it all credit risk, or is there other structural issues? And also the points that Pekka made about venture capital.
Pekka said very interesting words. When he met an entrepreneur, and he cried out to him, "Convince Herman Gref that I am a trustworthy and give me credit." Pekka, you won't believe it, but I, being a vice president, I have to convince a lot of my colleagues in the bank who are responsible for decision-making in the credit committee, loans committee, or whatever, so that they could give to this or that entrepreneur who I know for 10 years or so. I know that these are trustworthy borrowers, that they are good entrepreneurs. I try to convince them, even in my own company, and it doesn't work, or not always work. We have very difficult risk management laws, and you can never do without that. You know that each and every bank would have their own risk management laws. Sberbank bears certain responsibility because it's responsible for the deposits that the public makes in the bank. And this is another limit for us, both material and moral. And when we ask questions to our borrowers, how do you view our rates? About 40% said that it's not possible to take. So half of the market goes away. We have tried to have a look at what's happening in the EU, and there 20% of all the borrowers are negative towards the banking rates. I do believe that there are possibilities, and these possibilities are not only with the central bank but also with our commercial banks. I think we have a specific risk assessment method that our central bank is offering, and those methods they cover all types of entrepreneurs. They do not differentiate between a small and medium entrepreneur and a large entrepreneur. So I think we have to learn from the European Union, where they have lowered down certain risks for small and medium enterprises. We have a very high refinancing rate, 8.25. That's how much our money costs to us. That will later be brought down to businesses. If we are able to bring down that rate, or if we are able to create a special business fund from our reserves and bring down that cost of borrowing to 5%, then we can do much better. Or we can have our own barrier for similar loans up to 5 million, and that's what we can do. What else does the biggest bank of Russia offer?
More than a year ago, we started a new program, and we started going the way in creating the services for small businesses. There are 2 corridors. The first specialized Sberbank branches. It's not just a bank branch where you can get a loan, you can also get advices on finances, on taxes, you can get knowledge. If you don't have infrastructure, you can also carry out B2B meetings. These are centers of business development in Russia. We already open up 140 such centers in Russia. We'd like to open 10 more of them. We also opened such a center in Petersburg, in Bolshaya Morskaya 7, next to Hermitage. So it's quite a very good approach, and entrepreneurs really like to visit these centers and work there. And the second way is our web portal, which is da-sreda.ru. These are first of all, the training courses. We offer more than 60 training courses. We can select the best in the market. This is our insurance not to be unsuccessful when you get a loan. We like to test the entrepreneurs where they're capable to be entrepreneurs, because there are also people that starting business not able to do this business. And we also collect data on trust. We also create our own bank network. We create a network of verified users of this portal. We have more than 1 million users, and more than 300,000 users are verified. These are users already known to Sberbank. We know that they are really proven loan takers. So this is a very good tool that can be useful for our market and also for our companies willing to enter other markets. We also have such trade, more bridges with China, Finland, and Austria. It will be very good support. We also have some other services in this business environment portal, but we will take more about it later. Thank you.
Okay, well, I can see hands going up in the audience. People wanted to come back to you on that. But before we go to the audience, I just want to bring back into the conversation Mark and Suma, who both also wanted to follow up on some points. So Mark first. Yeah.
Thank you. I just I felt like Sergei was getting beat up on a little bit for his rates and his approval process, and I just wanted to say from our perspective, as we look at the Russian banking system, there's over 1,000 banks in Russia. The 30 largest banks provide 60% of the SME funding, and it's actually the smaller regional banks where credit is even tighter. So we should give Sergei a break. His bank is actually one of the more generous lenders towards this sector that's out there.
Thank you, Mark. And Suma, would you like to?
Thanks very much. I think just on the cost of credit, which Sergei mentioned, I mean, I agree with Mark. I think the problems are much more at the regional bank level in Russia in terms of SME lending. And there seems to be a couple of things. One is their own sort of credit assessment, their risk assessment within these banks, I think is overly conservative for the types of business they're trying to do. And I think there's some issues here about training of their risk officers in the specifics of their lending. Secondly, it seems to me that many of these regional banks have yet to develop tailored products for the regions they're working in. So if you look at the comparative advantage of different regions in Russia, too many of these regional banks are just offering generalized type of lending, whereas I think focusing on agriculture products or other products which are really tailored to the region would bring down cost. Thirdly, one of the reasons cost of lending is high is because, frankly, credit officers within banks aren't specifically trained in the right way to do SME lending, and moreover, they don't work sufficiently with the businesses they're lending to develop their capability. So business plans that come into banks for financing are not well enough developed. So unless one, as part of the whole process, really builds up the capability of the SMEs to actually put forward good business plans that can be financed, that you can have confidence in, cost of lending is going to remain high. So I think there's a number of things we need to do with the regional banks. It's not really a Sberbank problem. I think it's much more at the regional bank level that we need to worry about.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I mean, of course, Pekka mentioned earlier this issue of trust, and of course, SME lending is ultimately a trust business and an expensive business too, because to build the relationships at grassroots level is an expensive business. But I want to bring in some people from the audience. I know various people are very keen to come in. So this gentleman here first. Could you say who you are and thank you.
Dear colleagues, Alexander Brichala, I'm president of Opora Association in Russia. As Sergei was talking about the Opora Association in Sberbank, I would like to say that we are cooperating not only with Sberbank but also with the Primorsky and Opora. Our association created the first investment foundation for $10 million together with Sberbank, and the main areas are the IT and innovations, and we'll also have some applications which are under consideration now. And we also made quite a big project for social business, and the interest rate will be 8.25%, which is at the level of a refinancing rate. As per the Sberbank, we have one condition, and Andrei, Sharonov and Pekka already said, we also need a mentor as an addition to the money. And this will be the way how we'll invest into the SMEs. This is just my small message. And now my question, in my opinion. We're talking about the price of loans, but we are forgetting about this important thing, about the role of regional governments. And I would like to ask Mark and Pekka, and if you are investing not in the Russian entrepreneurs, you are investing into businesses working and operating in certain territories, and you have your own ranking. Which territories, which regions have the better regional government supporting the SMEs, and which regions do not really support the SMEs? Because we also carry our own studies within the association, and these studies show that the majority of Russian regions don't have governments supporting SMEs. And my money is in the market, and if the project is interesting, and if the investors understand about the scalability of the business, the money will be provided. But no matter what money you invest, if you need 1.5 years in order to get a gas line connection. This is my question to you. Do you have your own ranking on how well the regional government support the SMEs and what impact it has on investments? Thank you.
We'll just use the time well. We'll just take a couple of questions and then we'll come back if you don't mind for comments. So, you want to ask one?
Good afternoon. I would like to thank you for a very interesting discussion. My name is Sergei Smyslov from Raven Group. I would like to go back to the question on venture investments. I'm talking about the venture investments of at least $10 million. My own company is constructing a new production site in the Nizhny Novgorod region. We invested about $10 million, and we have also our own package for investors, and the price is $10 million. So when we're now facing quite a significant challenge and a problem because the banks are out of this project, it also will we send application to Sberbank, but the answer was no. But the work with investment funds is quite long. How can we also work with the Russian venture funds that can invest more than $10 million in the project? How we can work with them?
Well, before we go to some answers, yes, the front row here.
Yeah, how are you guys? My name is Sergei. I was born here, but I live in Australia. And what I found in Australia, 19% is not that bad when you think about it, right? In Australia, I think we get 90% from the bank as well. My question was, coming back here, and what I found in Australia is it's very simple to open up a company, very simple to do anything, all right? In terms of funds, it's very difficult in Australia as well, and I assume at the moment it's very difficult here too. Now, the easiest thing so far for a couple of my startups, some of which have a lot of traction, is to go to Dubai or Saudi Arabia. There, there's there's no bureaucracy, not that much bureaucracy, right? Just set it up, and you can get, well, if you get a seed round, you can get round A, nice and simple. Is there anything I can talk to, anyone I can talk to here to maybe discuss that? Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we could just get some points before we go back to the Q&A. So, well, yes, but Pekka, do you want to start? There was one question there particularly for you. So,
yeah. So, in a Russian tradition, there is a tendency to focus on big things, big houses, lot of square meters, lot of big construction issues, and this financing SMEs. Small businesses, it's not very attractive because nobody cares about issues which are less than $100 million in the media, for example. I think the wind is changing in this, and we are doing a lot to change this whole thinking, because no company will become being 100 million from the day one. It takes, even in optimum scale, several years to do that. It's also, the question was that can I rank the regions? In every single interview, in every single TV station in Russia, always they ask from me as a Finn, can I rank the regions, can I rank the governors, can I rank the everything? And I always say, niet, because I'm not here to do ranking. However, what we are definitely doing, not only in Skolkovo, but I can say in the government structures, in federal level, we will do an effective manners that in the future the success of building new businesses is not measured by who has the biggest technopark, who is building the biggest infrastructure, but actually how much of the VC money, the private money in the region is guided to the companies. If I could decide only one thing, I would make it as a federal law. That's the only ranking. There are differences between the regions. Without ranking anybody, I must say that, for example, in Novosibirsk, Krasnoyarsk, Kazan, Rostov, Kaluga, you can feel it when you talk with the companies that there is interest to start new businesses. And it doesn't happen only with the big banks. You need government support and funding. Of course, Moscow, but Moscow is a own country almost in Russia. So there are this part. And then I think a very quick comment about this fast track to Russia. I am a very simple guy, like a real Finsky coin, so I have to see it by myself. And I have tested it by starting new companies here in Russia. for example, how easy or how difficult is to start a business. I did it first time 6 years ago, and there was a lot of all kind of propuskas and all kind of stamps, all kind of things. We did it for a new company this February. Okay, we did it through the Skolkovo services, but anyway, it was done in Moscow area, in Skolkovo, in 42 days. And we have a company, bookkeeping, bank accounts, all that kind of thing, 42 days. Okay, it is more than it is in Australia, it's more than in Finland, but it's still okay. It went extremely well. So I'm saying that to start a business here, it is possible to do. And there is a lot of improvement what has been done for it, and I hope that it will continue. And for money, the answer is regional VCs, regional venture companies, because nobody can from Moscow can evaluate the capabilities of guys and girls in Vladivostok. They are sleeping when we are awake and so forth. So you have to be, the VCs needs to be in those regions, otherwise it will not fly.
Thank you, Pekka. I'm now going to make a plea to the panel and to everybody else to try and keep comments and questions reasonably brief so we can get as many points of view across. But I'm now going to ask Suma whether he will rank the regions of Russia.
Okay, well, I don't have to because it's been done in a way. And all I need to do is point you to the right bit of the website, really. There's a thing called the Business Environment and Enterprise Performance Survey. It looked at 37 regions of Russia the last couple of years, and it says where is it most useful to, most easy to actually get a business started and get going. And that's being used by EBRD with the Russian government to try and target our investments as well. Secondly, I do believe, like Pekka, that things are getting easier at local level in terms of some of the administrative difficulties, barriers to actually setting up a business. It's getting much easier than it used to be. In terms of corruption levels are dropping, I think, in many regions. But again, this survey tells you where that's better than other places. On your question, I think particularly, it's a very interesting issue, I think, about private equity, particularly and SMEs. We have invested, I think, in some 50 equity funds now, which are focused on middle-sized enterprises. We've struggled to make it below to the smaller ones. That's true. But I think this whole private equity sector and SMEs is a sector that is untapped, and it's something we should be pushing hard on.
Thank you. And then Mark and then Sergei, please. Thank you.
Yeah, just quickly, I want to say that you don't have to listen to Mr. Bulldozer for very long to know that he has a certain way of investing and leading. And I would just throw this out there. If you're looking to attract international capital, I think you could call it smart money, but it's also habitual money. And by that I mean they have a pattern about the way they invest. So they don't think regionally. They think, I'm very interested in e-commerce where we've had interest, or I'm very interested in healthcare. You know, they have a sector that they're interested in. They don't look by region. And then in terms of VC investing, you know, they have a pattern. Either this is a set of assets I'm going to be able to securitize, or this is a set of assets that I'm going to be able to IPO. And so they look for those formulas. So the best thing I could say about attracting capital is try to speak their language a little bit as you look for help.
Thank you. And Sergei.
First of all, about the rankings, I think it's not a good thing to make rankings, but the Poor Association has been creating rankings for the last 6 years, and because we have a poll among 6,000 entrepreneurs, and we like to look through the entrepreneurs' eyes on the investment client, and many governors are not really happy with our results because they think everything is going really well, but his region is ranked close to the bottom. But these rankings are made by good analysts who are taking part in the Global Economic Forum, and they also are aware how the global estimates and assessments are done. But the main problem is in the so-called Dutch disease, because the oil money is something what is feeding us, and these dollars from oil are breaking the market rules, because the governors are more motivated to get money and subsidies from the federal center instead of developing the business in the region. if we can overcome this paradigm, if we can turn these governors and the administration leaders to the development of their own entrepreneurs, we will have a green light to the infrastructure, and the people will start thinking about the gas pipeline connection, grid connection, and the money will be available. As for the venture funds and companies, we have the Russian venture fund. It's a kind of fund of funds, but they are actually really hungry of products, but there is a lack of products. Probably you cannot persuade in your products, or the demand for your products is not good enough, because the demand for the SME products and services is a special thing. We need to develop the culture. We want our big companies not to make everything be inside the fence. We need to let them subcontract more work. So I don't want to talk about the prospects of your own company. It is probably can be good, but the products of your company can be also demanded not only in Russia but also abroad. This is a kind of a paradigm we have here in Russia at the moment.
So I'm now going to ask Andrei, where would you like to rank Moscow in the list of Russian regions?
I think it's a popular Russian game to create rankings of cities, countries, and regions. But I would like to be serious. We cannot trust rankings by 100%, but we shouldn't ignore them where it is, because it's dangerous. We also look at the rankings of Moscow in different national and international rankings. Thanks God, Moscow is really visible in different rankings, and it also gives us very good feed to think about. As for the entrepreneurship's climate, I would like to give you quite a bad example, but I think something what you can learn from. The International Bank created a ranking for 30 Russian cities. I don't remember the definition, but it was something about the business conditions in the city. And Moscow was ranked 30th, and Vladikavkaz and Ulyanovsk were ranked first. And despite these rankings, we have a queue to make a business in Moscow, and not in Ulyanovsk or Vladikavkaz. And the conclusion is that the cost of business in Moscow are high in comparison to the 29 cities out of this ranking. However, the cumulative benefits from business in Moscow are not comparable with these 29 cities. And the cumulative effect of doing business in Moscow is certainly higher than the cost you may have in other cities. And what the colleague from Australia was talking about, probably it is easier to make a business in Dubai, but if you come with these products to Russia, it will be an imported product. And it will be an imported product for us. But if you manufacture this product here in Moscow, even with high costs, it is more likely that it will be easy for you to enter the Moscow market, because Moscow has a population 15 million people to consume products.
So we're getting towards the end, but does anyone want to ask some questions before?
Can I make a small remark on example? As for the ranking of World Bank, we also have the same results, because we also make the poll of industrial enterprises. It is quite difficult for the manufacturers to work in Russia, because Moscow region is ranked first in our ranking, because the market is very close, and it's quite really comfortable to have a facility, production facility in the Moscow region, around Moscow.
So we've got time for very quick questions, and then I'll ask the panel just to quickly sum up. So, if you could be, yes, at the back.
My name is Werner, and I'm an entrepreneur in the biotech field. I was successful in attracting foreign investors, but there is one question they always ask, and I have a very difficult time answering is, what are my exit opportunities, whether that's an IPO or an acquisition? Can you address that question?
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Yeah. This gentleman here.
Punia Vikram, президент компании Pharmasynthesis, город Иркутск.
Purma Vikram, pharmaceutical company, the Irkutsk. My question to Sergei Borisov, the vice president of Sberbank, and it will be good if he could answer that right away without any elaboration on his side, because my question relates to the relationship between banks and entrepreneurs in Russia. For 8 years ago, I'll just give you a brief of history. For 8 years ago, we started working with the Sberbank in the city of Irkutsk. Our turnover was around $3 million. For the 8 years, the company frog-leaped from 3 million to 120 million USD, and it landed in the top 10 larger pharmaceutical companies of Russia. We are thankful to Sberbank for the assistance they provided throughout this time. But just a while ago, Sberbank told us that it is going to improve its work, its standards, and they have established a department for underwriters. Your colleague, our colleague, works now in Moscow, Maxim Poletayev. You might know him very well, actually. And we used to have a very nice cooperation in Irkutsk together with you. So our limit was around 60 million USD. When underwriters came, they said to us, you see, this thing we don't like, this thing we don't like, and this thing we don't like. We don't know the customer, we just see the papers, and that's what we can tell from the papers. As a consequence, well, it's good for us that we've grown that much and we have our own cash in abundance, but today we have a loan, a limit from Sberbank, a lending limit of only 20 million USD. However, by 2015, we have a plan to grow as much as $500 million. Well, definitely we'll do that, either with Sberbank or without Sberbank. My question is it always good to have such a red tape? Is it always good to put such limits? Moreover, you contradict yourselves, because you put all around the town, all around the country, your advertising, which says, we help those we know. So what are you going to tell about that? I fully share the emotional spirit of that presentation. I know that underwriting is a new initiative of Sberbank, and we have some reasons for that. And I can give you a lot of examples when loans were given, when lending was done, when a credit manager, a credit officer, looking face-to-face, gave a credit, gave a loan, and then it turned out to be a scheme. Underwriting was established in order to exclude those person-to-person communications or interviews, and to make it more cynically, yes, that's true, and more technologically. There are certain losses, yes. I can tell to you that in Moscow we have 40% of all the applications for loans adopted, and in Tula 70% of all the loan applications adopted. So in 60% of cases in Moscow, we lose our credits. We do not give credits, we lose our business. But underwriters is an experience as a best practice learned from other countries? Well, let's address this together with you. I've recently talked to the first vice president of Sberbank, and we can review your case and we can try to adjust and amend something, and this is the only way we can search for truth.
I'm afraid we're running out of time, so I'm just going to ask the panel, so Suma's had to leave, to ask the panel to just sum up their final thoughts on some of the points that have been raised today, and obviously a particularly interesting point raised at the back there, which I guess gets to the heart of a lot of the issues that we've been discussing this morning, you know, in terms of particularly around internationalizing the financial market and bringing in expertise and management, and which is so what the question that goes to the heart of it is, how do you get your money out again, which is the question international investors are asking. But anyway, if you could just also combine with your thoughts on other points you want to raise, very briefly, please. Mark first.
Sure. You know, as an international investor, we don't climb out on any tree limb that we don't know how we're going to get back off of. So I agree that gets to the heart of it. Some other things that I heard that I think get to the heart of it are this issue of trust, this issue of, maybe it's all the same issue of everybody communicating the same language and goals around how the company is structured, the culture of the company, the mindset. These are things that take time to develop, but forums like this that introduce that culture and make it more and more part of the entrepreneurial and the SME environment here are only going to make this stuff happen more quickly. And if the opportunities are as great as Mr. Bulldozer says, it's going to happen very quickly. Thank you.
Right. Pekka, would you like to speak?
No, very quickly about exit option, which was the exit. We had yesterday an investment council meeting, and this same question was done because the exit market in Russia is somewhat limited, so to say. And of course, you mentioned pharmaceutical as a specific industry where I think the typical 99% of the exits are mergers and acquisitions by the big pharmaceutical companies. I hope that there would be a healthy mix of exits, meaning perhaps 10% of the, let's say, Skolkovo companies in IPO, 40%, 50%, depending on the industry, continuing growing, and then there is, of course, the rest will go to the mergers and acquisitions. I just want to tell you, to lighten up the discussion, a joke about banking. This gentleman was asking about the different policies and ways of working and changing structures of the bank also. As a Finn, I got the call 2 weeks ago from my own bank, and they said to me that, Pekka Sepovic, we would like to have a discussion with you. I said, why? Because we have a new policy to discuss everybody who is in our record as an unemployed. And I said that, yeah, malinki finski oligarch, what the fuck is this? But I have to go to the bank so not to close my credit cards, which is like an interesting. So there are all kind of changing policies all over the world.
Thank you very much. Andrei, would you like to finish up?
Thank you very much. I applaud to Pekka. I found out that Finland is not just the Santa Claus country, it's also a Mickey Mouse's country and a country of small Finnish oligarchs. Or rather, big Finnish oligarchs. Now I'd like to finish off by one banal thing, which is so important and we always forget it. Two policies that any country does, any government does, including the Russian one and its regional government, we should always give priority to one policy. I mean the individual measures of support and the systematic approach on improving the macroeconomic situation, the reduction of entrepreneurial risks, and treating the investment climate in the country. So these two policies, they exist in parallel, but one is related to macroeconomics, risk reduction, entrepreneurial climate. Well, this one is fundamental. And without that, all other measures would be at least less efficient or non-efficient. And second, none, apart from the government, both regional or federal, is capable of carrying out those systematic measures into life.
And one final comment from Sergei.
Do you know what we think about right now? Russia needs modernization, and a lot is said about that. we will have to learn a lot from developed countries in a very short period of time. Well, if the financial community can create such mechanisms or funds that will allow small and medium enterprises, growing enterprises, dynamic enterprises to enter the capital markets of the European countries and then bring back to Russia all those knowledge, best practices, best management practices, investment and technologies, then it will be the most appropriate way to follow. If our financial community would think about it, then invest to be investment principle will work. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to the panel. I can say that this is definitely a discussion that could have taken place in any country in Europe at the moment and is taking place in every country in Europe, but clearly there are some very specific issues in Russia. I thank the panel very much indeed for illuminating them and wish everybody else a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei.
Thank you, Andrei.